This being Black History Month, I wanted to deal with something which we hear quite a bit of, and I'm sure a lot of us don't know what it means, and the first time I heard it, I was kind of offended, and that's the term white privilege. And when I heard the term white privilege, my first reaction was like, what the heck are you talking about? Are you telling me that all white people are privileged? And I could tell you my background, and I know some other people who've gone through hell growing up, but you see, that wasn't the point. The point is that whatever we white people go through, however awful our lives are, everybody in the world somewhere is going to go through that same thing. It's just that on top of all the awful things that any human being can go through, in our society, people of color and indigenous people have some extra problems that we don't have. But I thought it'd be better to hear from a black person, and I was really happy to find these clips. It's from an hour interview that I found, and surprisingly, this is T.D. Jakes of the Potter's House in Texas, and he's a black Pentecostal minister, conservative. That's not somebody I'd usually go to, but being black, the black Pentecostal churches and the black churches generally are very different than the white evangelical churches, because the black ones are engaged in society and in solving the problems of society because they feel them so strongly. But I think you'll really appreciate his storytelling and his approach, and I learned a lot as I listened. So part one, take it away, Jim. He begins with a background to racism generally.
It didn't start in America. This whole supremacy didn't start in America. It started in the Dutch countries, in Europe, in colonialism, in the pursuit of new lands and new territories, and going after the gold and the silver. When you think of a country like Ghana, Ghana and I am the same age. Nigeria isn't but a couple of years older than me, okay? So when you look at these countries, like these countries were infused on top of tribes because the value of the Europeans was on getting the gold and the silver and making the money. Slavery wasn't about racism. Slavery was about money. Slavery was about finding a way to fund this country and get it up off the ground and get it in an agricultural society and needing more workers, and it was a business deal. And then after the agricultural went to industrial age, there was no need for slaves, and then we went from the Emancipation Proclamation down to Jim Crow, because now you don't know what to do with me because you don't need me anymore, and yet you don't want me to be one of you. And so now I'm lost in the sauce of this struggle. And when you start talking about this issue, thanks for taking it back beyond the ship, because my children need to know that their heritage didn't start with a whip or a noose or that sort of thing. They also need to know that the early stages of the police department started out in catching runaway slaves. So when you start talking about the way black people feel about the police, there's a reason we feel like that about the police. We need to understand what you brought up. I was in South Africa, and I was going through the Apartheid Museum, and there was a sign said that when the Dutch came here, we owned the land and they owned the Bible. And when the fighting was over, we owned the Bible and they owned the land. Okay, we need to come from there all the way up to my great-grandmother, who died when I was about 10 years old, who still bore a mark in her body as an old woman where they had branded her to say who owned her. She was born a slave, she died a free woman, and I remember her. So the people who say, that's a long time ago, I don't have anything to do with that, that's not true. I'm old, but I'm not that old. My great-grandmother was a slave. So how do you expect from my great-grandmother to my grandmother to my father to me in 4 generations for us to be okay when we have had hundreds of years of being inbred, sold, babies snatched out our arms, prodded on slave tables, abused for hundreds of years, and then say, we gave you some welfare checks and we gave you affirmative action and you should be good. It's like molesting a child from 3 to 18 and then giving them $100,000 and say, you should be fine. No, what we have to do is really own this, not to make anybody guilty. Nobody can change anything about the past. I don't want to be nowhere else. I love America. This is my home. It's all I know. It's not about that. But since what happened, like any family who goes through, like what women have gone through with the Me Too movement, since what happened, let's own it and let's figure out how to make this work better now.
All right, and so in the second part, he's going to even go back to the racism we find in the Bible and how the early church struggled with that. And he's going to say some stats, and these stats actually apply equally in Canada to both the black community and the indigenous community, that they are 7 times more likely to go to jail for the same offense as a white person. And he doesn't say this stat, but in Canada, people of color and indigenous people are 7 times more likely to be killed by the police than white people.
First of all, I think it's a misnomer to think that the early church didn't have racial problems. They absolutely did. Let's just talk about that for a second. And there was a great deal of bias built into the early apostles and Peter and his unwillingness to open up to the Gentiles, and it took a revelation from God for him to do that in the middle of his ministry. There was dispute between the Samaritans and the Jews back to the time of Jesus when the woman at the well said, we have no dealing, your people have no dealings with my people. And the whole reason that Jesus tells the story about the Good Samaritan is to force the Jewish lawyer to accept a group of people that were alienated from the sociological constructs of what went on in Israel. So this is not new. This goes all the way back to Cain and Abel. We have been fighting about something ever since humanity began.
Yeah.
So religion is not exempt from it, and also I must admit that religion is complicit in the black and white aspect of it. There are many disputes all over the world, but when it comes to the black and white issue in America, religion has been complicit and doesn't like to admit that. Our missionaries were our masters. So the same people who taught us about Jesus beat us and cut our foot off and hung us and castrated us. So that creates a very odd scenario. When you look at these slave Bibles, the early slave Bibles, and their own museums up at the National Institute for African Americans in New York, redacted out of the Bible was the stories about Moses. Redacted out of the Bible were the stories about neither bond nor free, all one in Christ Jesus. They gave the slaves the partial Bibles with things like slave obey your masters. That's a part of the story. When you look at the fact that Southern Baptist Church just in the last 10 years apologized for their role in slavery, when you look at the fact that the early slave castles in like Elmina in Ghana have churches above them and the women were being raped beneath them, religion can't just walk away and say, we don't have an obligation or responsibility to be involved in correcting this problem because we influence even secular ideas about culture and morality in the most interesting way. But I think a deeper point is this.
Okay.
We're not really just talking about the hearts of men. We're talking about systems that were built, sometimes intentionally and unintentionally, that were biased. It's like opening up a restaurant and you have all your favorite foods. And then you have a customer base who maybe likes something different than you like. When it comes into privilege, when you design the country and you design the system and you design the criminal justice system and you design those sorts of things, you design them in such a way that the system is geared against us. White privilege isn't always about white evil. It's as simple as my iPhone. I use this illustration. My iPhone has a image recognizer. The only problem is it has a hard time recognizing me, because all of the people in Silicon Valley that designed the phone were young white guys. So the phone recognizes, and you can Google this and find this out. The phone does not recognize minorities, not only blacks, but browns and Asians. It doesn't recognize the face as easily because the system is designed for white people. Okay, take that from the phone, which has no heart, has no emotions, has no prejudice, just programming, and put it over in the criminal justice system. And you start to see the inequities where we commit the same crime. I'm 7 times more likely to be incarcerated than you. There's an economic factor in there too. It's not just racial. It's also court-appointed attorneys. It's also bias in the system between the police officers and the DA and how our political system has worked. Both Democrats and Republicans have made office over, if you think back over the last 20 years on being tough on crime, all the way back to the Reagan era on up, the Clintons, everybody has used it. I'm gonna be tough on crime, they got elected. Well, tough on crime was code for tough on us. And so when you look at that kind of situation, it's not as simple as the Romans road and giving them John 3:16 and the world's gonna sing Kumbaya and we're all gonna wash each other's feet and we're gonna be fine. I don't need my feet washed. I need equal housing, equal jobs. Right. I wash my own feet. You know, I don't need all of that stuff going on. I need a pathway out of a criminal justice system that has not corrected itself. Mm-hmm. The laws have changed and people are still in jail for things that are no longer illegal. Some people are in jail for years waiting on trials through plea bargain agreements. Those sorts of things that we know to be wrong, that both Democrats and Republicans agree to be wrong, yet we have not been reticent or readily focused on fixing them because we don't fix well things that don't affect us.
The next clip again goes into how that people of color and indigenous people, they face treatment that white people don't have to face, particularly when it comes to policing and the criminal justice system. A personal story that's very compelling.
We have a terrible problem in some of our inner cities with black-on-black crime, like you have white-on-white crime in the Appalachians where I grew up. We have it in the inner city. Here's the problem, though. When you have white-on-white crime, you call the police because the police represent safety. When we have black-on-black crime, we can't call the police because they'll kill us too. One of the most frightening experiences of my life as a father was to get a call a few months ago from my oldest son who says at midnight, "Daddy, I'm in trouble." That's how he started the conversation. I thought, oh God, what is this? My heart sunk down into my shoe. He said, "I had a car wreck." He said, "and it's bad, Daddy." He said, "The ambulance is out here. I don't know if the other person in the car lived. He was going the wrong way or something. He hit me, and it's really, really bad." And he said, and then he said, I said, "Are you okay?" He said, "I'm okay. The car's maybe totaled, but I'm okay." And then he said, "The police are here." And when he said the police are here, panic, absolute terror rose up in me. I said, "Keep me on the phone. Keep me on the phone." I was more afraid of the police killing my son than I was afraid of the car wreck.
I'm so sorry about that.
It's my son.
Yeah.
I have no desire to end up sitting in a trial that I can't win about my son. Hats off to the police officer. He was nice, he was professional, he was amazing, and the more he talked, the more relaxed I became. But the panic that I felt is what I'm talking about. The utter terror that it's midnight and my kid is out there and he's gonna think he's a drug dealer because he dresses fly and he's hip and he's cool and he might have had on a hoodie, you know, and he's nervous and he's a kid. I mean, he's a good kid, but a quick move and he's dead. That's how real that is. It doesn't matter how much money you make. It doesn't matter how many degrees you have. It doesn't matter what neighborhood you live in. I was terrified till I heard the policeman's voice and I listened to what he was saying. And I told Jamar, I said, I'll come get you if you need. He said, no, I'll get an Uber and get home. I said, call me when you get home. That's what we live with every day. We live with it. No matter who you are, no matter what you have, you live with that reality that any day you could get shot. They could change the information. They could plant something on you. They could tell the story the way they did about over and over about both and John, about Arbery in Georgia, about George Floyd. They changed the records. What they said happened and what happened were completely different. That's our reality every day. I just don't believe that it has to be that way in this country. I don't believe that we have to be 7 times more likely to be incarcerated than a white man, even when we commit the same crime. I don't believe that we have to spend more money on jails than we do on education. I don't believe that we're spending billions of dollars to incarcerate people when 70% of the people in jail are in jail for nonviolent crimes. 70%. 70% of them. I don't believe that it has to be that way. I don't believe that we have to argue about everything from mass to kneeling down. We were so offended by Colin Kaepernick kneeling down at a football game, said he was disrespecting the flag. Kneeling had nothing to do with the flag. It had everything to do with a peaceful demonstration about what we're talking about. Then when we start looting, stop looting. When we were peaceful, stop kneeling. Wait, you can't have it both ways. So a knee on the ground or a knee on the neck, which one is worse?
And in the last clip, he brings us into what our scripture text is talking about. This isn't about guilt or shame. We have no place in our lives for that. This is about a call toward humility, learning, and facing what is, and helping to make change.
You had an air conditioning unit in your house. I'm not talking about a unit, I'm talking about in the window. You were rich people. I did not know what that was like. Having said that, I thought I had a fidelity and a fraternity with poor black people today, until this guy cusses me out on social media. And he cusses me out really bad, and I said, and I was mad. I wanted to fire back at him and he's black, and I wanted to let him have it and let him know where I came from, and you don't know me, and da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And then I kept thinking about what he said. And I realized that he was cursing at me because that's his language. And that's how he talks. And if I could get past being offended by what he said, I could hear the hurt behind what he said. That he feels left out and neglected, and he thinks I'm out of touch. And then I had to grab this fact. He's right. I did grow up poor, but I never stepped over needles. There were no drug deals outside of my door. There was no shooting in my neighborhood. We were just poor, but we weren't afraid. There weren't burnings and bombings and gangs and killings and Crips and Bloods. And I don't know, he's right, I don't know what it's like to be him. The humility that it takes to bring yourself down off your high horse and admit that I may not like the way you said it, but hey, I think you're right. That ability to listen starts healing. Right now, when you start saying something, we start arguing. And anytime you're arguing, you're not listening.
Right.
If we listen at each other, I found out that his criticism was a cry for help. I found out that he didn't know how to say it in a politically correct way, but he has no hope of being me. And he's angry as hell at me about it. And I don't have a right to get mad. Because I do have air conditioning and a doorbell and grass in my front yard. I have a right, I have a responsibility to be a voice for him. because I can't say it without cursing. And I can say it in a language that maybe somebody will understand. And I am seeing people in the church and outside the church, corporate America, elected officials, and spiritual leaders who are starting to say, ooh, I don't know what I don't know. Teach me. I said that wrong. What was wrong about that? Instead of defending it, how did that sound to you? If we would just humble down a minute and listen and not be an expert on everything, we could fix some things around here.
And so Jesus said, when you go to some special event, perhaps a wedding, don't seek the seats of honor.